Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video I will be using resin, glitter and moulds from Let's Resin to create sparkling ice crystal clusters. And with those ice crystal clusters I will be creating a gorgeous Christmas wreath which lights up at night time. If that all sounds interesting to you, stay tuned and enjoy the video. Here are the two silicone crystal moulds I'll be using today from Let's Resin, alongside the box that they came in. Let's Resin moulds always come very nicely packaged. And to fill my silicone moulds, I'm going to be using Let's Resin's Epoxy Resin. I really do love this resin because it's so crystal clear and it's well packaged, just like everything else you will get from Let's Resin. This comes with a stirring stick too, which is excellent because I go through so many of them. And like everything else from Let's Resin, it comes with comprehensive instructions which are always so useful, especially for beginners. The mixing ratio for this resin is 1:1 by volume. So I have my mixing cup here and I'm going to measure 40 millilitres of part A and 40 millilitres of part B. And that fills the two crystal cluster moulds really perfectly. Once both parts were measured out, I gave it a really good gentle stir for about 2 or 3 minutes until it was completely clear. Right, once your resin's mixed, it's time to fill the moulds. I like to fill them about halfway and then give them a good squeeze to help any trapped air pockets to get out. That's the thing with intricate moulds like this. There's lots of little places where air can get trapped as you pour the resin in. So even though the resin degasses really well by itself, it doesn't allow for air pockets. Those don't get out quite so easily. It's those really big bubbles you get right at the point of the crystal. They're very stubborn. And so what I do after I've given it a good squeeze is I get a micro brush and I poke it down to the end of each crystal shard to try and dislodge that trapped air bubble that you get in there. Once both those moulds were filled, I decided to add some glitter to the surface. And so I took a sheet of cardboard, which I'd folded in half to catch the glitter. I put the moulds on the cardboard and I sprinkled on some of Let's Resin's chunky magic opal glitter. And the reason I'm sprinkling it on the top instead of mixing it with the resin is because I didn't want the glitter to take over. I didn't want it to be completely immersed in the resin. I just wanted it to show through. And the thing with glitter is it sinks quite a lot as well. So I knew some of it would sink down, but most of it I wanted to keep low down near the base. And that's how simple it all is. I repeated the process another 3 times, so I had 4 of each crystal cluster. Oh, and what you can see me doing here is just adding a little bit of the leftover resin just over the top so that it's not just glitter at the base, it's sealed in, but the glitter will still mostly stay at the base. Whilst that was curing, it was time to start on the base for my wreath. I had this new mould from Moulds Shapes, which I loved, and I was dying to use it, and I thought this was the perfect time. I've also got a big round mould from Devon Dotting. You just need a mould that's round. Any silicone mould that's big enough and round is fine to put in the middle of the mould, and that will stop the resin from going on the inside and you will get your ring shape. Sorry, it's a little bit blurry. I don't know what was going on there. But anyway, that's the idea. If you don't have those moulds, don't worry. You can get like a silicone cake mould, that will do well. And you don't even have to have a hole in the middle. You could do a solid circle. So don't panic if you don't have the same things that I have. So as you can see, I just moved it onto my levelling table, which is quite useful because my table is not level and it needs to be. And I'm just measuring the distance all the way around. I've got a piece of paper that I've just folded to the right size, and I'm just making sure the space is kind of the same all the way around. It doesn't need to be exact, but it can be difficult to do this kind of thing by eye, you know, to get it perfectly central. And it doesn't look central to you because of the angle of the camera, but it is actually right in the middle. Once the orange mould was perfectly central and pressed down to form a good seal, I just poured in my Let's Resin epoxy resin. I can't exactly remember how much there was, but yeah, I just had to guess. It didn't fill it all the way up to the top, but that is a deep mould and I didn't need it as deep as that anyway. And that's as simple as that is. Very, very easy. And I think it was a really good way of making the ring shape for my wreath. Right, I waited until the next day to demould it, and I couldn't wait to see how it turned out. So it was still a little bit bendy, and that's normal with epoxy resin. It will be bendy, especially until you get it out the mould. Once it's out of the mould, it stiffens up quite quickly. But yeah, don't panic when you demould things and they're a little bit bendy. It's normal. So the first job is to take that orange mould out of the middle, and I just gave it a little squeeze and it just came out really easily. Next, I turned it over and peeled off the mould from the wreath, the Moulds Shapes mould. Oh, I do love these moulds. They're so good, such excellent quality. I'll leave a link and a discount code for this mould in the video description. So let's have a look to see how it turned out. And as you can see, it's looking pretty good. There's a few little bits that just needed filing off, just around the middle where it seeped under the mould, the tiniest little bit, but yeah, it's pretty much good to go. And I was very happy that I had the idea to do that. And it's quite even as well. I'm sure it's not perfect, but yeah, pretty even all the way around. Now let's have a look at the crystals. Now I do love these moulds from Let's Resin, but I'm not going to lie, they're not the easiest things for demoulding. This big one was the easier of the two, but the other one, I really struggled for a little while, but then it started to dislodge itself and it was okay. But yeah, it was a little bit of a struggle. So let's have a look. There was a little bit of overflow around the edge, but that will come off with a deburring tool. But they were crystal clear and I was really happy with them. And the glitter didn't take over. So yeah, I was pleased about that as well. So for this second one, I'm going to fast forward the demoulding because like I said, it was a little bit tricky. But with a little bit of stretching and pulling and brute force, I got there. The good thing is these moulds are very strong and very forgiving. So yeah, the mould was fine after all of that. And once again, there was a little bit of overflow where I'd poured it a little bit deep, but yeah, they just needed a little bit of filing off. And as I just mentioned, you can use a deburring tool or a nail file. And look how clear that is. Crystal clear, absolutely wonderful. I love this resin, and yeah, you can see that the glitter is subtle and not overpowering. So stepping forward in time, I've repeated the process another 3 times and I have 4 of each of the crystal clusters. I have also off camera drilled a hole so that I have something somewhere to attach my ribbon and hang up my finished wreath. And yeah, I just used a normal drill. It was easy, but I did do it off camera. So yeah, there's the hole. And let's get on to the next step. Next, I took some 0.8mm copper jewellery wire and I threaded it through the hole and wrapped it round a couple of times so that I had a place to attach a jump ring, and that way I could attach the ribbon to the jump ring and it would all be external to the actual wreath, because my crystal cluster will be glued over the top of that hole. And yeah, then I wouldn't be able to attach the ribbon through it, would I? So that's why I'm doing it externally like this. And it looks a bit fiddly. I suppose it was a little bit. But yeah, I just wrapped it round twice and then opened up the jump ring, threaded it through that, and then it was all external and, accessible once the crystals were all glued on. And I'm leaving the wire like that spread out at the front of the wreath, and then when I attach the crystals with the UV resin, the ends of the wire will be trapped between the crystal and the base, and it will all be super secure, and that won't be going anywhere. So here I've got my large jump ring, and I'm just going to open it up a little bit, thread it through, and then close it up again. And hopefully now my garbled instructions will be a little bit more clear, and you'll be able to see exactly why I was doing that. Okay, it's time to add the crystals. I drew around the wreath base on some paper and marked out I folded it in half twice and marked out those lines so I could see that I was getting everything in the right place, and that made it a lot easier. I've got some UV resin in my little silicone cup there. I've also closed my window blinds because obviously the sunlight will start to cure it before you're ready for it to be cured if you don't close the blinds. And if you're taking a long time with your UV resin, it's always best to work under artificial light. And I'm using the same glitter as before, the Magic Opal, just so that it brings it all together a bit better. I could have just used clear UV resin, but I thought it would be nice to put the glitter in. And one thing that I missed out with that I should have done was I should have put some tape behind that hole that I drilled before applying the UV resin. It completely slipped my mind, so yeah. That was a mistake. If you do this, make sure you block the hole before you add the resin, because it'll just seep through. But I cleaned up the mess that I made. It wasn't a problem. Anyway, we all make mistakes, don't we? Right then, let's get on with this. Now, what I wanted to do first was start with the one at the top. I just poured on some of the UV resin and then put my crystal into position. And I repeated that process for all of the crystals before I started to cure it. There was a little bit of trial and error with that first one because of the thickness of the wire that was there. I did add some extra resin to increase the depth. I didn't want pockets of air under there. I wanted it to come in full contact with the base of the crystal. So yeah, the rest of them were a lot easier. I was just splodging a little bit on, adding the crystal and then doing the next one. Sometimes it did float over the side a little bit, but if you've got a little piece of kitchen roll handy or just your gloved finger just to wipe the edge, that's fine because you won't really see it. It's clear, the wreath is clear, as long as it's smooth. Any bits where it overflows, it's not a major problem. So I'll speed it up now because I really did take my time with this. I wanted to make sure it was just right. It will look, just like I said before, it will look a bit wonky to you because of the way the camera is angled. But yeah, it's pretty even. The only thing is that those bigger of the crystal moulds, they're not symmetrical. So you're not going to get it completely symmetrical looking because it just won't work like that. Anyway, once they were all in place, I very carefully used the leftover UV resin to fill in all the gaps and make sure it was all nice and even before using my UV lamp to cure it all in position. I had to hold the UV lamp over it, and I did it for about 10 minutes, I think, on that side. And then when I'd finished doing that side, and as you can see, I just keep moving it around, But once I'd finished doing that side, I turned it over and did the same thing from the back. And it cures better if you cure it from the other side, because it's got a better access to the, for the light to get to the UV resin. But first of all, before you can turn it over, you need to make sure those crystals aren't going to move anywhere. Right then, it's all done, and this part is optional. I have some clear tubing here and some LED lights. I decided I wanted to put LED lights at the back, so I've measured the clear tubing to the right size to fit the middle of the wreath. I've trimmed the end there so it's a bit thinner so that I can slot it into the other end of the tubing. Just like that, you see? It's not perfectly done, but it helps a little bit to just keep it all together. I'll be taping that together when it's all finished. But yeah, I wanted to have the LED lights in it. What you could do is just glue the LED lights directly to the back of your wreath. But I found this tubing in my bits and bobs box, and I thought it would be perfect to protect the lights because I wasn't sure if they were suitable to go outside, but also to protect my door. When it opens and closes and the wreath moves, it will cushion it, won't it, with that tubing there? So it's dual purpose. And I've folded up my LED lights so that they fit the tubing, and I'm just threading them in. So once the lights were all threaded in, I just took some sticky tape and wrapped it around where the two ends join, just to make sure they were secure. And then it was time to connect all the light tubing to the back of my wreath, and for that I'm going to be using my hot melt glue gun. I started off by just gluing where the control box is and putting it into position, and then just adding the spots of glue underneath the tubing at intervals. So at this stage I think it already looks really good, and really I could have left it like that and it would still look really pretty, but I decided it needed something extra, and I got these little berries off Amazon, artificial berries which have got like a frosted effect on them, and I thought they'd work really well. I just needed to snip the wire off them all. And yeah, I decided to add those, and again I will be using my glue gun. And this idea did work really well, but I did encounter a problem. What I did was I filled in all those spaces in the wreath, the obvious places where, the berries would work perfectly. The only trouble was it was too uniform. I started to see like geometric shapes in there. It wasn't random enough. So yeah, I did end up having to really faff around with it to make it more pleasing to the eye. I wanted it to look more natural, and at one point it really wasn't looking natural at all. But in the end I was fairly happy with it, and it was time to add the ribbon. I chose a tartan design. I think nothing says Christmas quite like tartan. And this ribbon has got like a wire in both sides, so you can mould the shape of it. So it was perfect for this kind of job, to make a really nice bow. So let's make the bow. I've just took a strip of ribbon. I'm folding both ends to the centre, and once again I'm going to use my glue gun, the good old faithful glue gun, to glue where the join is. If you don't have a glue gun, obviously you could just stitch it, but if you don't have a glue gun you would have probably found the last step difficult anyway. Yeah, get a glue gun, they're really good. Right, next I folded it in half so I knew exactly where the centre was, and then I needed to make it bunched up in the middle. And to do that I folded it in half the other way and then folded it back on itself, just like you can see here. Sometimes it's so hard to explain things, it's best to hope you can just get it by looking at what I'm doing. Anyway, once I'd done that I glued it all in position with the glue gun again. Next, it was time to cover that middle part up, so I cut a smaller strip of the ribbon, and then as you can see here, I folded the edges into the middle to make it narrower, and then I had my strip. And then it was just a case of wrapping it around the centre of the bow and gluing it into position at the back. And that's how easy it is to make a beautiful bow. So I knew I was going to need to be able to attach the whole thing securely to my vertical hanging ribbon, the ribbon that I will be hanging it, on the wall or the door with. And I needed to be able to attach it to that. So I just took a little bit of the wire that I used before and threaded it through that circle of ribbon at the back, and then that was ready for attaching later on. So next I needed to attach the vertical ribbon that I spoke about, the one for hanging it up. And for that I've chosen this red kind of mesh style ribbon, which I had in my ribbon box. I can't give you a link to that. I've had it years and years in my box of ribbons. So yeah, I don't know where it came from, but I thought it would work really well because it was nice and strong, and it also had the holes in it which would be useful for the next step as well. So I just scrunched it up. It was a little bit big really to fit through that jump ring, but I got there after scrunching it up, and in the end just was able to pull it through. And then once it was pulled through, I folded it over, and I didn't attach it to itself because what I'm going to do next is use the wire in the ribbon, and it's going to go through the holes in that ribbon and it will hold it all together, won't it? So I didn't really need to sew the ribbon together or anything like that. If you're using normal ribbon, you might want to use some hot melt glue to hold the two bits together, or stitch it. But yeah, like I say, these metal bits will go through the holes in the ribbon and it will hold it all together. So once the wire was through, all I needed to do was twist it to secure it. For the hanging ends of my bow, I took a long strip of ribbon, folded it in half at an angle so that they wouldn't hang straight down, but they would hang down at an angle, and then positioned it so that I was happy with it and glued it into position. And as you can see, I'm just gluing it over the back of the bow where I'd just twisted the wire, so that wire is covered. And then once that was, the glue had set and it was secure, it was time to make sure that the hanging pieces of ribbon were connected to the back of the wreath in the right position and they would stay still. And I used my glue gun for that as well. Okay, so once that was done, we were nearly finished. It just needed the finishing touch. I'm just making sure both pieces are the same length and then cutting a V out of each one, and that's it. Finished. And there we have it, a beautiful ice crystal Christmas wreath, and I think it looks really good. I'm very happy with it, and I'm very grateful to Let's Resin for sending me the crystal moulds, which are fabulous. So I'm guessing that you want to see it lit up and in position, so I don't want to let you down. Let's have a look. So here it is during the day, and I think it looks really smart. Not too big, not too small, just about right, and I really like it. And so here it is at night time. From a distance, a little bit closer, and there it is. Isn't it good? I really like it lit up. I really do. I think it looks so nice. So there we have it. We've reached the end of another video, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up if you did, and subscribe if you would like to, and I will see you again next week. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.